Your first lecture is over chapters 1 through 3. These are public speaking basics, and so we're going to cover the first 3 chapters kind of briefly, going through each thing that's really important. So first, public speaking basics. Public speaking is the process of designing and delivering a message to an audience. And it involves understanding your audience and speaking goals. It also involves choosing elements for the speech that will engage your audience with the topic. And then third, it involves delivering your message skillfully. So again, understanding your audience, choosing elements to engage your audience, and then delivering your message skillfully. And we do have 3 categories of speeches based on the speech's intended purpose. First is the informative speech, and this is just delivering knowledge or information. Reasons we want to give this speech include maybe giving instructions, describing events or activities, and reporting the outcome of a process or event. The second category is the persuasive speech. This is speaking used to convince, motivate, or change an audience. We just want to convince, motivate, or persuade the audience to do or believe something. And then the third category of speech is the entertaining or speech to entertain speech. This is speaking done on significant or special occasions. Ceremonial occasions include weddings, funerals, graduations, awards, and other events like that. And the reason for occasion-based speaking is to honor some person or group, and it requires as much preparation as other kinds of speaking. Next, we'll talk about the different models of communication. There are 3 main ones that we'll talk about. The first is the linear model of communication. Linear model of communication. With this, information flows in one direction. I'm going to put something up here so you can see it, and you'll have, if you're doing the reading notes, you'll have a model you can fill in. So at this one, we have a sender, and they create the content or the message, and they transmit it. The content is the message itself. The channel is how that message is transmitted. And so this could be like through air, through a coaxial cable, which is the internet, phone lines, like how is that message sent? And then the receiver is the person for whom the message is intended. At the same time, we also have some noise, which is any interference with the content. The next model is the interactional model of communication. The interactional model, and this adds encoding, decoding, fields of experience, and feedback. So we'll go to that one. So we still have the sender and receiver, as you can see. We still have the content in the channel. It also adds encoding, and it's not shown up here. There's no really a good way to show it, but it would be here. So when the sender is creating the content, they encode it. And then when the receiver receives the content, they decode it. So encoding is when the source creates the message, adapts it to the receiver, and transmits it. And then decoding over here is using or sensing a source's message, interpreting it, evaluating it, and responding to it. So things like an unfamiliar vocabulary word, too fast of a speaking rate, small print on visual aids, those things can make decoding really difficult. We also add the field of experience here, and these are beliefs, attitudes, values, and experiences that each person brings. And these also can affect how people interpret a message and how they send a message. And then we add feedback right here. Feedback is when a receiver responds and talks directly to the source. They might give nonverbal messages during the speech, like nodding or yawning, or they can be more indirect and delayed, like an email sent 2 days after the initial communication. So that is the interactional model of communication. And then finally, we have the transactional model of communication. Transactional model of communication. And this is, it helps explain situations where multiple sources are interacting at the same time. So this is a lot of conversations you have. You're talking to someone, you're sending information, as at the same time you're receiving information from your friend or whoever you're talking with. So that's why both people in this instance are called communicators. They're both a sender and a receiver at the same time. There's no pure sender, no pure receiver. The third thing is the exchange of messages, including feedback, is by both parties as they collaboratively create meanings. And this also, as you can see, has noise, channel, content, message, field of experience, and communicators. These are fun little drawings from me to you. Okay, continuing on, we have some various public speaking dimensions that we need to cover. First, we have the physical dimension, and this is the tangible environment. So like different contexts like a classroom, church, auditorium affects your or influences your ability to adapt and interact with the audience. In a classroom, you're pretty close to people versus you talking in a gym full of people. You might have to use a microphone, you might have to yell, you might not be able to interact as much. So that tangible environment does affect it. And physical dimension also includes how a room or a context is designed. So if there's a big pole in the middle of your speaking environment, or if it's too cold or too hot, too loud, anything. So that's first. Physical is the first dimension. Second dimension is temporal or temporal. And this has to do with the time of day or the moment in history and how the message fits into that sequence of events. And so a humorous speech would be received differently if it was the first speech of the day versus if it followed a somber speech on death and dying. It might also affect your speaking if you have class right after lunch and everyone's a little bit tired, or if it's the last class on a Friday, if it's 3 o'clock on Friday. That sort of time situation has an effect. The third public speaking dimension is the social psychological, and this refers to status relationships among participants. And so this is among your class and how you work together and how you see each other. And if you're giving a presentation to your boss, that's an example of a different psychosocial or social psychological relationship where that boss has power over you, and so you might be a little bit more formal in your language. Then the fourth dimension is cultural, and it's important because of differences in beliefs, norms, and practices. And a lot of misunderstandings occur when we don't know or understand those differences. So those are the four dimensions of public speaking. Next, it's really important to know that words have power. People get fired because they use the wrong word. So lots and lots of ethical considerations. The first ethical consideration is intent. And so you should begin your speech with good ethical intentions. You should start with not wanting to cheat, I guess. Plagiarism often occurs when a speaker uses a phrase or content from someone else's work. And this can be intentional or unintentional. You might have lifted something from a book and said, oh, I'll rewrite it later, but then you forget. So it's kind of unintentional, but regardless, it's plagiarism. So don't do that. The second consideration is means, and means refers to the tools or behaviors used to achieve a desired outcome. And as you can imagine, these tools can be used ethically or unethically. So threats and manipulation would be unethical means of persuasion, right? Then the third ethical consideration is the ends. And these are outcomes you desire to achieve. Some end results could be good for the source, like getting their message out, but it might be bad for the receiver, so it might be detrimental to their health. So if you give a speech on, you shouldn't wear a helmet when you're riding a motorcycle, that might be bad for the receiver because it's detrimental to his or her health. We also have 9 principles of ethical communication. You can read through them. Basically, be good people, be truthful, be accurate, be respectful, promote the well-being of everything, avoid any distortion, intimidation, coercion, violence, intolerance, hate speech, any behavior that degrades people. You should avoid those. You want to share information and opinions while still respecting privacy and confidentiality. So, there's a lot of ethics to be aware of, and there's a nice little checklist in Table 2.1 in your text to determine if you're ethical in your speech preparation. We also have a little information about free speech. Free speech allows us to hear and consider multiple points of view without fear of persecution. However, if your speech leads to violence or other illegal acts, it is not protected. You don't have the legal right to say anything at any time. And additionally, free speech just means you won't be prosecuted for what you say. It doesn't mean you can say whatever you want without people getting angry or having other consequences, or you just automatically get an A because it's free speech. That's not what it means. It just means you won't go to jail because you disagreed with somebody. Unless, of course, it led to violence or other illegal acts. So that's just a note on free speech, just so you're aware of what we're doing going forward from this. Then the last chapter we talk about today deals with speaking confidently and communication apprehension. This is chapter 3. Communication apprehension is the fear or anxiety associated with either real or anticipated communication with another person or persons. Fear or anxiety associated with either real or anticipated communication with another person or persons. And this is by James McCroskey. Studied this component quite a bit. You'll probably hear his name pop up a lot. It's basically the fear of speaking in a variety of situations. Some of you might have really high communication apprehension regarding public speaking, and that's fine to have. That's totally normal. That doesn't mean you don't have to give your speeches, though. You still have to give them. And why we talk about communication apprehension is so you can understand it more thoroughly, so then maybe you can help keep those feelings at bay while you're giving your presentation. During ComApp, we have a physiological response. So your psychological response of being nervous quickly becomes physical. The body's circulatory and adrenal systems just shift into overdrive. It prepares us to function at maximum physical efficiency, which is the fight or flight response. We also have our hearts might pound, our hands get clammy, we might feel butterflies, other gastrointestinal symptoms, just lots of things can happen when we have that flight or fight response. It's very normal, and it means that you care about your speech. It means that you want to do well. And we might become so anxious that we fear we'll forget our own name and be unable to present the main points of our speech. That's a big fear for a lot of people, but it doesn't happen very often at all. Let me just tell you that. Going through a couple of myths might help as well, might help us understand communication apprehension. A lot of people will say telling a joke is a good way to start the speech. I would tell you not to do that. Humor can be really hard. It can be offensive. It can be unpredictable in terms of how your audience responds to you. And you have to be good at being funny, especially in a speech. And so if you are not funny or even on the fence about it, I would stay away from humor as a way to begin the speech. Another one, some people will say to imagine the audience naked. That does not calm your nerves, so don't do that. Another myth, any mistake is huge. That is not true. It matters how well you recover. You just accept your mistakes and continue on. And quite honestly, you might be the only one that knows you messed up. So no need to dwell on it, just keep going. Another myth, a lot of people might say to write out your whole speech word for word and memorize it. I will tell you, this is a recipe for disaster. If you forget one little part, you can freeze up and just kind of get paused. So memorizing your main points is easier, just those main points, and it makes your apprehension lessen. So you really want to have those main points well thought out and then written in your speaking notes. Another myth is that audiences are out to get you when really they want you to succeed. They are cheering you on, they're pulling for you. If you kind of get stuck in the middle of the speech, everyone leans forward and they want you to do well. They're not out to get you. And the last myth is you will look as nervous as you feel. Research does not indicate this is true. You're actually able to mask a lot of your nervousness. And so don't tell the audience right off that you're nervous. They probably can't tell. And if they can tell, they're being nice and not really acknowledging it. So just go out there and give your speech and be as confident as you can. We do have a few sources of communication apprehension. The first is trait anxiety. And this means you are going to have communication apprehension in any situation at any time. You're just nervous about talking all the time. We might also have context communication apprehension. And this is prompted by specific contexts, like public speaking in class, giving presentations. It might deal with formality. And so people might be intimidated by a formal setting, giving a work presentation to clients versus giving a toast at a wedding. Just depends on the formality of it. Uncertainty is another aspect. And this is when it's hard to predict and control the flow of information. So I don't like talking to kids. I have my own, they're lovely, but you just don't know what kids are going to say back to you. It's very uncertain. So you could say I have some communication apprehension dealing with the context of uncertainty. And then novelty is another context, and that's when environments are new to us. When you're new to somewhere, you might just be the type of person who stands there and watches instead of joining in conversations right away. And that's because you have some communication apprehension in the context of novelty, and that's totally normal as well. Another source of communication apprehension is the audience. The people in your audience might prompt anxiety, and this might be an audience of one. So if you're talking to your crush or your new boyfriend or girlfriend or a teacher that intimidates you, that is your audience causing that anxiety. And then the last source of communication apprehension is situational. And that's created by the combination of the audience, time, context, just all the things working together made you nervous. Maybe you're not usually nervous talking in front of your peers. And maybe you're not nervous giving a public presentation. But in this particular one, it was to your peers, a public presentation, and your mom decided to show up, and that made you extra nervous and really highly apprehensive. Something like that. That would be situational. Okay, Josie, I'm really scared now because you're talking about all this apprehension. Well, I'll tell you how to reduce it now. You can do a couple of things prior to the speech, so before it happens. First, think positively. You're going to be fine. Second, prepare as much as possible. And that's my main suggestion. Prepare, prepare, prepare. Practice. You also want to analyze your audience. So this is part of the preparation. Think about who's in your audience. And the more you can sort of visualize them and practice with them in your brain, the easier it is to talk to them for real when that time comes. You also want to clearly organize your ideas so it's really easy to follow your organization when your nerves do kick in. So you can still look down and get your speaking notes together, figure out and remember what you're supposed to be saying. You'll also want to practice in conditions similar to those you'll be facing when you're speaking. So use those speaking notes, stand when you're speaking, time yourself. If you have a visual aid, practice with that. And use visualization. So imagine you giving your speech successfully. And like I said, practice, 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 because you'll eventually gain enough muscle memory where your mouth and your brain will just give the speech for you, even if you kind of black out. And that's happened sometimes. You not black out, fall down, crash, boom. I mean black out like you go up there to give a presentation, you sit down and you're like, I can't remember anything. What just happened? And everybody says, oh, you did great, because you practiced and your muscle memory took over. Now, during the speech, you can also reduce communication apprehension. Deep breathing is one thing. Just remember to breathe. You can include reminders on your note cards or on your notes as well that remind you to slow down, pause, take a breath. Also focus on the audience. Don't focus so much on yourself. And that kind of makes them appear less threatening. You know, just you're talking to them. You're talking with them. Just approach it that way. And also maintain your sense of humor. If something happens, maintain your sense of humor. This isn't brain surgery. It's not a super intense, scary thing. Nothing's going to happen that's bad. You're going to give a speech. There's going to be thunderous applause, and then you're going to sit down. That's it. I will also say during the speech to keep your knees a little bit bent, just to keep the blood flow to your feet. So just keep a little bounce in your knee. Don't lock your knees. Don't lock your knees. Don't lock your knees. Don't lock your knees. And last thing we'll talk about is coping with the unexpected. So yeah, things can go wrong. They usually don't, but if they do, as long as you're prepared mentally and physically, then you'll be fine. The first thing, speech content can be interrupted by a missing note card. Yikes. We also suggest you using speaking notes, and so a missing note card isn't such a big deal. But if you're missing a part of your notes, if you've practiced your speech enough, you might be able to recall and paraphrase that missing piece. You can also pause and kind of think about if you can just omit that information without hurting your overall speech presentation. And pausing is less distracting to the audience than struggling through and saying, So if you just take a pause and a breath, that's less distracting than going, let me find my notes. So it can be interrupted by some missing notes. Second thing that you might need to cope with are technical difficulties. Technology sometimes breaks down. Sometimes the projector lamp burns out. And so you do need to have a backup plan developed in advance. As you're developing presentation aids, think about what you're going to do in the event that you won't be able to show whatever it is that you want to show. And then the third thing, external distractions do occur. Sometimes audience members wander in, or they leave to take a phone call, or they have a cold and they're coughing like crazy. It's often useful to pause and wait until the awkwardness is over and the audience is attentive again. However, your speeches are timed, so you might just want to keep going forward and just keep following your speech. Your instructors are mindful. They realize when someone walks in the middle of your speech or distracts you or whatever, and so they'll know what's going on, and they won't blame you for other people. And finally, to do when you're dealing with external distractions, you want to maintain your composure. Getting angry for any reason only adds another distraction to an already awkward situation. So just be mindful of that as well. So today we talked about public speaking basics, some ethics, and also some communication apprehension.